extremely large.
Several times we have tried to establish contact with these humans. Usually those selected were not willing. They were afraid others would consider them liars, mad, or try to destroy them.
These lucky or unlucky people, depending on the point of view, has had a rather remarkable experience. Imagine driving from point A to point B on a trip which normally takes 2 or 3 hours and finding when you've arrived at over 10 days of time. Well, this is, I guess, the beginning of that story. I won't go into too much detail because I'd like you to hear it from his own lips. Alex only ever spoken once before about this to a small group, so he's sort of come forward with no designs for ground or fame or fortune. In fact, many we're sort of getting out to encourage him to come forward and giving him some information to research and back up some of the aspects of his experience. So please give him a warm welcome. He's come all the way from New Zealand. We had some trouble getting him over here through the government. They've certainly shown a lot of interest in the story. And I'm sure we're going to ask some questions on that at the end. We'll be open talking. So give him a warm welcome for Alex.
Thank you, Duncan. Yes, well, I hope there's a room for people here to do more than on my own. I'll sort of stand. This is terrible. We should try interacting louder sometimes, so I can enjoy that. Okay. Now, what people probably come here to presumably hear the story that took 10 days to unfold. And I wish it was that simple. It's actually a 7-year scenario. Partially my own understanding and enlightenment has taken 7 years, but some negative forces on this planet decided that what I've been through was not for public consumption. And that then entailed 7-year lesson, I suppose, to deal with them and then to advance myself. A spiritual advancement, if you like, or just an understanding of nature. Very difficult to know where to start. I'll take you back to February of 1989, and which is when this interaction occurred, and then I'll progress through as I understood it to unfold, which won't be in a linear progression because I didn't realise that I had 10 days of missing time until several days had elapsed, and it took me really a couple of years to sort out the exact sequence. So it'll be easy for you to understand if I just take it back as it unfolded for me. So we go back to February 1989. And I was living in Rotorua, which is a small tourist town to the south of Auckland, the main city in the North Island of New Zealand. And it was a pretty dramatic time for me. I'd been married for 15 years, and my marriage was just about to fall apart at that stage. And I think, and the reason I mention that is because I think the situation that I was in, stress, trauma, whatever you like, maybe something to do with my connection with whatever it is that I've interacted with. Since we've gone through some therapy a bit later date, I found that during my childhood, this has been going on all my life, pretty much this interaction. Whenever there was a stress in my life, this is when I seemed to be able to connect with these people. Whether they were monitoring me and sort of educating me and getting me through the difficult spots, I really wouldn't like to speculate on, but there is a connection between my emotions and my connection with whoever these people are. So you keep that in mind, that I was really quite stressed at the time this interaction occurred, that I'm holding this for like this. actually leaving the family unit in mid-February 1989 and driving to Auckland to stay with some friends. Now, coincidentally, that was the first time in my entire life probably I could have disappeared for 10 days and nobody was really keeping a check on me. I was sort of in limbo between one aspect of my life and another. And I don't think during the whole duration of my life I ever was gone missing for 10 days and nobody would notice. So I think it might pay to consider the people that I interacted with, the alien intelligence, are time travellers. And if you put that into perspective, maybe they had already known where I would be at a set date in the waiting room. And that was the best time to push me and start this scenario. That's something I only just came to grips with quite recently in dealing with thinking about why it should have happened and how they would have picked that particular time. That may be an aspect of it, but we won't go on it too long. We've got a long way to go. It's just 7 years of my life, and if I don't fit most of it in, you won't realise what's been happening quite recently as well. It's culminated in what we're even getting here. So I'll just skip over the first initial bit because this involves driving from Auckland to Rotorua and then finding that we had a few days to sort out. But first initially, you might think this is sort of blasé, but I thought I lost 2 days or 3 days. So I originally left Rotorua on a Monday, and when I sorted out what was happening in Auckland, I think it was a Thursday, and I couldn't quite figure out what happened to the Monday, the Tuesday and the Wednesday. It was only sort of a week later I realised there was another week before that missing as well, so it was pretty dramatic. I was into March really before I realised that I hadn't had the last 2 weeks of February. That was really put that down to, I was pretty stressed out. It was a pretty disastrous time in my life. You don't get married and live with one partner for 15 years and dispense with that relationship and just brush it over. Not like that. So I really wasn't very interested in a lot of stuff going on around me, except that there were some pretty weird things happening, I can tell you. You might notice I'm not wearing a watch after our first couple of speech talks. They don't like me very much. I've got a drawer full of watches and actually I thought there was something wrong with them until I figured out there was something wrong with me. Batteries last about 3 or 4 weeks and they go flat, and then you take them back to get the watch fixed and it costs more to get it fixed and to buy another battery, so you put another battery and it goes flat and months you throw the watch away. And I did that 3 times and now I've got 3 or 4 watches at home if anybody's interested. So I just don't wear them anymore. But they are battery operated watches. I must admit I just threw that down for a revenue timepiece, but I just got used to not bothering with them. I have to bother when you're actually giving me check on the time. Okay, now, so this is one of the odd things that happened. I couldn't tell left from right, which is so strange. It was like I was a negative photograph of myself, if you want to put it bluntly. And I was driving around Auckland, which I've been in for 40 years, previously moving to Rotorua, and I was getting lost in the streets. I was turning right when I should have been left, and I was halfway down the road before I realised to do a U-turn and go all the way back and shoot in section in the direction. This is, it's pretty worrying at the time. You think, I'm losing it here, and this is something very strange. Several other things that I won't go on now, but the biggest single feature was the car. It literally fell apart on me. Hydraulically, all the seals started to leak about the same time. I replaced one, another one would go, replace that, another one would go. And it's just an ongoing procession of mechanical repairs. The electronic injection system on it, that went sort of haywire on the way up to go there. Because I sort of did malfunction on the line, I realised that I can go fix somewhere else in the meantime. So I know one thing, alien technology doesn't like for a car, so I don't understand very much about them. And being a mechanic myself, I sort of, what was going on with it just was illogical. I'll get to another very peculiar thing that happened to the car a little later, because it was really what put some terrestrial agencies on my doorstep, I believe, and caused me to strike the head of since. basically what ended up, and because I was, like, I didn't have a place to live, I was staying with some friends, and my car was going up, and I couldn't get out to look at places to rent, and so I just sold it in the end. I just got to try and tax it. And I just bought something cheap and moved to another flat. And I was probably there for about a week, maybe 2 weeks. And I had a knock on the door from two British gentlemen that used to go from the DSIR, which is the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research Museum. So an establishment that doesn't exist now conveniently. It has been solved and broken up into several other government units. The gentlemen said they were from the DSIR, but they really acted more like policemen than scientists, although they did have a lot of questions for me. Evidently, for some reason, they had got hold of my car that I sold, where it was presented to them because the local garage couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. I don't know, but there was a lot of ongoing problems with that car, and they quizzed me on all sorts of things, like actually an accident concerning like high-tension power lines, or they had it in arc welding done on it, etc. Anything to do with electricity, I was quite keen, and I couldn't give them an answer. There was nothing that the car had been involved in that I was sure of. By now, though, this problem with desks and lights and the watches going flat and several other things that I can't remember of, you know, getting too nervous. That anyway, they gave me a really a third degree. It was, you know, like it was a real ruin. And this is from scientific folks who were supposed to only be interested in the car, and they didn't want to know what about me. The surprising thing was that I felt I had changed, because I was sort of repelled by these guys, and I couldn't quite understand that. It was like I could see right through them. The presentation seemed false. It was almost like I was reading their minds as they were talking to me. Rather strange sensation, because up until then I've been reasonably trusting people, and I'd take people on face value. If they said they were something, I would believe them until proven different. But these guys didn't add up. There was nothing about them that felt good, and I quite honestly panicked. And in the back of my mind, because they were going to present me with this car and ask me to buy it back, and I already spent some of the money. So I wasn't financially well off at that stage. Like I wasn't working, and with the marriage separation going through, you know, I didn't have a lot of excess money, so the scenario of buying it back wasn't going to work, so I just actually opted out. I said, I'm going to move, so I'd only been in the flat a couple of weeks, and I just up stakes and moved to another dwelling. Mainly to put them off on track and just to start fresh. I didn't like the way where they were coming from. That was okay. I didn't even forward an address. I only told a few close friends what my new address would be. And within 2 weeks, the same two guys turned up in the doorstep again, and we were through them for a week, because there was no way they could have known that I'd moved using normal processes. That really freaked me out, and they weren't quite so friendly this time. I think they probably sussed that I cottoned on that they were DSIR guys, or I wasn't completely sure. One of the gentlemen that flashed me an idea initially, and got it all over, this happened rather quickly. Initially, I wasn't in the best frame of mind anyway, but he had a wallet folder, and he had a DSIR logo and name tag, but on the other side it was the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which I did not know. I only found this out from Duncan about 18 months ago when I first spoke to him. I thought it was a Royal Institute, like a university or a scientific institute connected with the DSIR. But when I spoke to Duncan, he said, you realise that he was like CIA of England, or the ruling body of the self-government in England, which surprised me, and I had no idea, so the connection is possible between them on that. Essentially, to operate pretty freely within the SIS, which is the New Zealand Secret Intelligence Service. But all this research is very recent, and only really to try and make some sense out of where these guys were coming from, and why I was very cold towards them. So anyway, the second intervention wasn't very friendly, and I decided that enough was enough. I was going to move again, and I wasn't going to tell anybody, and I even what's his name. I used a friend's postal address. I was phoning with someone and I just used their phone, and so there was no contact with anyone that could possibly be from a government agency. There was no way they could trace me. I wasn't able to drive or phone call or something like that. But just before I moved the second time, I'm sure the flat I was in at that stage had been broken into, and a few other notes had been taken, I think, and a few other artefacts that had appeared, which I was trying to make some sense out of, some crystals and things that I'd been left with. They just appeared in the car after that 10-day trip, and I was trying to figure out where I would have bought them. They seemed to have taken one of those, and there's some doodles and some hieroglyphs that I've been playing with and trying to understand. Now, so I moved for the third time. I actually moved 5 times in 5 months to keep me off my back. But as this was unfolding, I was going through some regressive, we call them regressive dreams, repetitive dreams. Every night I would wake up about the same time with the same dream. And it actually went on for about a month. And the dream actually followed a theme, a continuous theme. It was a bit confusing at first, but when I used to wake up in the morning, I'd start writing down what I could remember. And from that, I built up quite a long and involved interaction with some very strange people that I couldn't place. Like there were no friends, there weren't friends, and they didn't fit anywhere. The actual visual image of who I was interacting with was a bit hard to sort out, but the storyline was very easy to understand because it just followed a logical sequence. And after about a month, eventually the dream stopped, and it just ended in a slightly different way with that last dream. It was like the closing of a chapter, the closing of a story. At about this stage, I was really freaking out because I really thought that I had some problems. You have no idea. I even went and stayed with some friends for a while because I couldn't be on my own. It was a strange sort of feeling where it's very difficult to understand. But anyway, I started putting the sequence of dreams together, and it's just like somebody started filling in the gaps for me. All the broken sequences fitted together as I wrote them. It's like somebody else was writing the sequence of events. So from that, and once I realised that there were government agencies chasing me, like I won't name them, I didn't say they were CIA or anything like that because I never identified myself, so that would be pure speculation and misuse. So I actually managed to put together what happened over those 10 days, so now I'll proceed to run over that for you. We have got some slides here, but this is not looking very well, so I'll leave it to the very end and just have to try and explain if you do this open the right pictures. It's a shame because pictures of 1,000 words and I think you understand it's taking a lot longer to explain something that's really limiting like this one. But what happened initially, I was driving, I can go back to when we were driving the car, and the strange sequence was, first of all, the car started the highway. The whole road seemed to start shaking initially. I couldn't tell whether the car or the road, or something the residents were off. Then I sort of had that stuck in the road, if that makes any sense. Then it sort of slowed down, a little motion was increasing and more visible. And I was trying to control this car that was going on, and then immediately it culminated in freezing up behind the wheel. At that stage, I was probably running about a year out of the wheel, and it's good, got free, visibility wasn't that great. It was a perfect scenario for the road accident, and sure that you're on the road alone, so you can do it in the morning, I think it's Monday morning. And I did see another car for quite some time, and virtually what happened is, it felt like I blocked out behind the wheel, and about that stage, the car was about to crash into a cliff. I can remember that all I could see was the cliff face coming up and then not being able to get out. And the next thing I remember after that is I was on, okay, blue light, and I really at that stage was going to have a body. It was just like I was a glowing entity standing in the middle of a blue cloud. That scenario took 24 hours to progress through, and I don't have full recollection of what actually happened during that process. I was told that I was going through a transformation at that stage, and I believe it was a dimensional transition to a fourth, fifth, or a higher dimension. I have no idea to explain it to you accurately because I don't fully understand that myself. I was definitely being transformed into some other life form anyway. Now at that stage, after I'd been there for, well, it was 24 hours, I didn't know how long time it was meaningless at that stage, I started to see some figures off in the distance, and they were just like glowing, basically, entities as well. At first the problem was whether I should stay where I was, or whether I should migrate towards them. I decided that discretion was better part of going, I stayed exactly where I was. But eventually they made contact with me, and there was no word spoken at that stage, and they were only in like a ghostly shadow as well. And they just wanted me to follow me. So we passed through this sort of cloud chamber, if I could describe it as that. And while I was actually there, there was like a ring of neon flashing lights around us. This area was quite neat, so I'd say that it was 2 football field, possibly. So it was a vast size to it, and we actually passed through that entire area, 200 metres or more, and we actually seemed to pass through this blue neon light field. I inquired later on at what that was, and it was an energy gathering device and also an anti-static device of some description. Don't ask me to fill in more details than that. But as we passed out of that room of light, I actually gained what I would consider to be my original body. I didn't have any clothes on, which was a bit of a fright, but didn't have the car either, obviously. And these other entities actually visibly formed bodies as well. It was just like we passed out of the cloud and we became, well, dare I say, human. Very hard to describe that sensation. There was still no communication. I hadn't been asked or ordered to do anything. It was just like a free will ride, if you like, and I was just going with my gut feeling that I should follow. There was no order, no communication. So we passed into an area where they had a glass tubular container, and later on I'll show you, hopefully I can show you some of the slides which might just show up. We're going to bring all that later on, but for the cameras at the moment, to continue in this train. Now, it was a glass container, and a unit came down over my head, and I don't know how long I was in there for. This was all part of a long process. And when I came out, I had what I could only call a blue Teflon bodysuit, which was actually a second skin. Now, that encompassed my whole body from head to foot, and it was like as thin as a skin, very smooth, and it was a sort of blue-grey colour. Now, these other entities that had followed me out of the blue cloud were also, I would say, dressed or occupied the same coloured bodysuit. Probably I'll get round to what that did first to help you understand why we had it on. I was first of all informed that it was an energy transfer suit, which actually gave the body sustenance, because these people didn't actually eat anything. They did take of a liquid, but that was their only physical intake. All the rest was some electrical exchange system between the craft or the energy field or energy source in themselves, and it was some electrical processing that circulated between them and their power units, which actually gave them energy. Nourishment actually from the atmosphere, I presume. Once again, I'm not really too conversant with the technical side of that. My education level is not high, and yet I was shown a lot of scientific things at a later date, which is going to be hard for me to convey to you because I don't fully understand why they were showing you these things. It's very difficult to understand, including some aspects of time travel, which course. So from there, and also once I had the blue suit fitted, I could actually communicate with them, and it was a telepathic form of communication, but it didn't actually encompass the use of words. And I was informed that the suit was doing the computerized translation of this language, if you like to use computer terminology. Now, as I said, there's no words used, it was actually resonance combined with light and pictures at the same time. So it was 3D spectacular picture show with flashes of colour. Now the colour was translated into language, and there's a resonance to identify particular colours. I've done a little detail on it, it's interesting. There was 12 basic colours, and they split like 6 primary colours, using 6 primary colours, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple, and mode shade. And the 2 distinct light and dark shades, and each one of those shades had a resonance, and that's how we communicate the numerical language. And the verbal language is the same, but infinitely more detailed, very difficult to explain. Each resonance actually identifies what level is what and what relates to the languages. But the pictures also followed. They gave you a picture of what they were talking about so you could understand. I don't know whether that was just for my benefit or whether that was just part of the sequence of events. But it actually became very, very easy to communicate using this sequence. It didn't seem like it was strange to me. Obviously the suit was doing its job, and I could communicate with them. Eventually I found out how to do so. And I was taken on a tour through the ship, but before that happened, I was brought to an alleyway system, which looks like a bowling alley, the local bowling alley, and it had a sort of central walkway, so it might have about 10 different alleyways. And I was told I was only really to use the end one, but there's no order, so don't use it. It's suggested that this would be the most appropriate alleyway for me. And the escort I had at that time was with me and said, you can go in there basically, and I was still standing a drive in the middle of nowhere with an alleyway which led to what looked like a blank door. I sat and I must have stood there quite a while, sort of debating, will I go down there or will I head off somewhere else? I didn't know where I was going to escape to. It wasn't really a scary sensation, it was more a puzzlement why they would just leave me, like I should have known where I was going and what I was doing, and believe me, I didn't. So I eventually walked down this alleyway, and the wall at the end was just blank. There was no door handles, there was no obvious lights or anything on it to touch, or it didn't look like it should have opened. And I actually stood there and waited, well, I'll wait for somebody coming up or somebody else coming through, and then maybe I can get in. But that went on for some time, and obviously nothing was going on, so I thought, I can't stay here forever. I'll see if I can feel something around the door that would enable access. Maybe there's a hidden trigger here that I can't see. And then when I touched the door, I knew that it right through it. That left me debating again for a while, what was the next step here. Okay, so I thought, well, obviously if I was told to go through that door and my hand went through the door, the best thing to do is try and go through the door. So I just walked through the door, and that's what happened. I walked through the door. Now that was a strange sensation, I have to say. Yeah, and at that point, I ended up in a huge room, and it was probably, I don't know, 8 miles across, circular. All the spaces were diamond. They seemed to have sort of lighting, but everything was stone, everything was moulded, everything was round. There was no sharp edges to anything. And it was like it was literally growing, I would say. And we'll come to that a bit later on in some of the other constructions, and I think growing is probably the most accurate description of my knowledge at this stage. Now, in this other room, I actually substituted some other human things to some of which had been in there for quite some time. Not locked in there, and they were willing participants in this scenario. I didn't realise at this stage where I was going, what I was doing, what I was supposed to be doing, what they were going to do with me. So this is my first chance to interact with what looked to be completely human intelligences and human life form. And the woman that first approached me explained a little bit to me on I didn't have any conscious participation in this initially, so I would have to say for me it was a surprise, it was an introduction, but later on I realised it's probably more an interaction. This had been going on for many years already. Now, at this time, it was happened in 1989, I was 40 years of age, and surprisingly this woman that was interacting with me said that she was also 40 years of age and she had an interaction. Now, the surprising thing was that was 1937, and she was now 90 years old and she didn't have a day over 40. That can throw a bit up and through. And we had a discussion. I asked why I was there, and she said, well, you have to ask the host that. And she said that there could be many reasons, and she wasn't going to guess for me. She explained that she had been brought aboard in 1937 and had decided to stay. And I said, well, I don't want to stay, when can I get back? And she said, once again, ask your host. You'll be back soon, no doubt. So we were discussing philosophical state of mind and what it was like to be somewhere for 40 years and not age one day. When Aileen and host came back. Now, my first initial contact was with a female entity, two female entities actually, but one that I remember particularly because she stayed with me right through the 10 days. And I called her Zena. That's a personal interpretation of the name, if you like, because I didn't speak English as such, and that just is a name that I was struck with that suits the personality of the person I interacted with, but I don't think I could convert the name to an English language, so I was really cool of these people during those 10 days, just names that suit. Because it's very difficult to get accurate interpretations from the language, which does not contain any English. And I don't speak a foreign language, so there's nothing else to it. Now, this is the first initial alien entity was very human-like. You could say childlike, but definitely she wasn't a child. I found out that she was also about 40 years of age. I think her, if you recall, her birthday was around about 1950, which would make her 39 years of age at that day. But she looked about 20, 18, something like that, very young anyway. To get exact on their age, but it wasn't exactly like us. I do have some slides here which I'll find and go through later, but I don't probably see them very well. Now, she was about 5 feet tall, I would suggest, about here. But the relevant thing here is I have no idea of scale of perception. I'm just assuming I was the same size there as I am now, because I didn't have my own physical human body. But these people were 10 inches high, 10 feet tall. It's just my relevancy to me. So please don't take heights as literally, you might be so small. Anyway, this previous escort, female escort, came back into the room that I was interacting with some humans, and they had with them what they called an elder or a guardian. Now, he was evidently the original base concept of what these people are now, and by that I mean they're back engineering their race, if you call it that, if back engineering is the correct phrase, had to be more human. And as I found out later, the reason for that was they need to come back here to live, and in their present form they cannot do so. Now they have interacted with the human race many times before, going back possibly millions of years. They were probably here long before we were, and I think along with some things that they're responsible for our genetic involvement. I won't go into too much detail there because I was told that there are many alien races that are responsible for the human race, so no one particular race can carry the can for that, if you like, because I'm right in the middle, which might sort of explain a few things to you. And these people were fairly quick to inform me that they did have quite an important role in the the evolution of man, but they weren't solely and simply responsible for it. But the genetics are in us, and basically we're a very, very generous company that's built in our system many, many millions of years and possibly came from another system before that. I learned a lot about this through the solar system, and even though something might be controversial, you might find that Lincoln's magazine is very, very similar. You can get from other avenues, very, very similar explanations of what's going on, or what originally involved our solar system. That these people originally colonised, I believe, a planet that you might know as Malbec, and they thought it was 5 meters higher. It is the fourth planet in our system at that stage in time, because evidently Venus wasn't there then. So it was never the fifth planet, and there was no asteroid belt. And I think quite possibly they might have been responsible for the destruction of that planet in early dimensional experiments. What they were doing was trying to evolve at a faster rate than nature had intended. They were quite advanced technically and very, very high intelligence, but what they were doing was playing God, and they had intended to push themselves into the fourth or fifth density dimensional reality ahead of their chosen time. And on their way to doing that, they destroyed the planet. They migrated from there, I believe, by the use of the moons of that planet, one of which is Phobos, to Mars. But in the destruction of their planet, what they told me is that they actually destroyed the atmosphere of Mars eventually too. Those two planets interacted very, very closely at that early time. Their planet was originally basically mostly water, I believe. In various other scenarios I've heard, thanks to Duncan in the last couple of weeks, that it might well have been Earth that was this further out ice planet. And that the Earth had been moved in its orbit quite recently into the solar system. So there's a slight confusion, but the material coming through from Duncan, it fits so well with mine, really, if you just remove a few dots of the I's and a few crossings of the T's, it does the same story. So, and I've never heard of Alex Collier before. He's an American abductee or interactee, or call it what you like. And evidently the information he's been given is very, very similar. Some quite exciting stuff, and I think we'll be reading about the next few months, and advise you watch out for it. I think some very, very good information there. Basically, some of what we're taking now. These people made their way from Mars, when its atmosphere packed it in, so to speak. I think they went underground for a while, and most people on Mars in small numbers in an underground installation. And I believe they migrated to what was then our moon. And when I say that, I don't think the moon they migrated to is the moon that we have here now. It may well be the moon we have here now, but not in the context of the moon we have here now. These people moved very close to the Earth anyway, and then interacted with development of life on this planet, so they told me. And that included the evolution of the human race, Homo sapiens, and Cro-Magnon man as we know, I believe. Certainly, when you look at the facial structure of the older race, the Guardians, or Elders, you certainly see, in my mind, a very primitive early man, and yet they're an advanced race. But if you look very deeply into their face, I don't know whether we'll get it up on the slide projector or not, you have to say, yeah, it's a early man. Very strange. Anyway, the object of this lesson was they needed some genetic material. They are interacting with some Earth humans that evidently have a closer tie to their primitive past interactions. Some of them seem to be more closely alive to them than others. I've been doing research for 7 years to find out why this other Earth woman that I interacted with, which was adopted in 1937. She was a very strong German history, and I don't really know any more about her than that at this stage, and of course they didn't know to get older. But there seems to be some tie. Now, I was going someplace, obviously, and they didn't describe where I was as a spaceship. I was told, though, that it was a transporter, and I really still don't know whether that object physically travelled anywhere or not, or whether we were transported from one station to another. And you might be interested to know that that transporter was supposedly constructed in the shape of a pyramid. And they used pyramidal forces to transfer matter from A to B. Whether they actually used pyramidal spaceships as such, I'm not sure, but there's certainly a lot of triangular craft about that have been spotted over the last few years, especially since 1989, and there's quite a few flaps. Now, some of the interesting information from Duncan actually is following. Supposes that in 1989, in March of 1989, which was the time that I was abducted, was when, if you can believe that we had a base on the moon in 1989, and that's what Material Duncan has got to suggest, that was when another alien swapped that base out. And it was believed that one of the meetings between, I think it was the American and Russian leaders at that time, I think it was Bush and Gorbachev, I'm not quite sure if that's correct, in late March or so of 1989 was to discuss the destruction of an Earth base on Mars, and they were slightly frightened with what might be next. And if you did have a base on Mars and it had been picked off by an alien race, I guess it would be a bit considered what might be next. Now, if that story is true, and I don't know if it is or not, because I don't know anything about that side of it. If anyone on this planet was having an alien interaction in February or March of 1989 and the authorities knew about it, I would think they would take an awful lot of interest in that person. And one of those people might have been me, and that could explain the problems I've been having ever since. There's certainly some subversive agencies on this planet, or agencies on this planet, are definitely interested in what that is and their adventures. And I don't possibly think it's so much being abducted by the Greys or the Zetas. I think that they are well in cahoots with some skeletons on this planet. And I think the American government already knows very much what's going on in that aspect of it. But there are many other races interacting with us on this planet, and it's those that the other military establishments are interested in, and it's those that are trying to keep away. I believe there's an ongoing war right up there now that is trying to prevent a lot of alien interactions on this planet, and it might be why one of the reasons that HAARP has been set up. It might be really an anti-invasion ultimate weapon, I don't know. Certainly, I see no malice in alien races interacting with a few months because if they wanted to take us over, invaders or innocent slaves, they would have done it right before we had nuclear weapons, because they were obviously here before that. They were certainly here in the 30s, I know that for a fact. Right, so I'm going to take the time. Now, I better tell you a little bit before we rule out of time. Very interesting this aspect of it, because this planet that I was taken to, funnily enough, I was told was our moon, but our moon was not up here, it was somewhere else. And this race had evidently engineered a dimensional leap, and when they'd done so, they were actually living on the moon that we had 12 or 15,000 years ago, and they took the moon with them. And they ended up in some future dimensional situation, which was possibly a lot worse off than they had imagined. During this dimensional shift or leap, they had ended up in a system, whether it's their own system in a parallel time, I don't know, where they genetically encrypted some. Put that way, they had actually started the aging process on the sun that was supplying the energy to our moon, the moon, the planet they were living on, and it was aging at a rate far more rapidly than it should have. And that brings us back to the reasons why they want to come back here. They can't come back here in the dimensional body that they're in, and also they've been living in very low gravity, low atmospheric pressure for thousands of possibly millions of years, and they just couldn't survive on this planet in their present body form, which is the reason why they seem to need some genetic material from various peoples. Now, I'm not actually going to elaborate on what we want in that department because it's personal and private at this stage. There's plenty of aspects we can go on with. When they took us to the planet as such, everything that they used, or everything that they constructed materials from, was really based on the natural forces on the planet. They didn't actually construct anything that wasn't of a natural life force. Once again, it goes back to what I saw on the ship, or the transporter, or whatever the unit was that they were transporting us around in. It needed to be grown as a kind of crystalline structure without seams or joints. And when I actually saw the dwellings and the buildings on the planet, they were constructed in a similar means. It was spiral type buildings, which it's built on here. And they seem to use an electromagnetic grid affair, and they actually grew these half animal, half vegetable dwellings. Now, the scenario that they told me was that the electromagnetic grid held the shape of the structure together, and the animal plant mutation was allowed to grow over this electromagnetic grid until it hardened and formed a base shell. And that is what they used for their structures for their houses. Now, as these were animal vegetable mutations, they did control the environment within the building because the animal section of the building actually can control the heating. So they didn't need any artificial heating. And there was a phosphorescent nature inside the building, and that provided a lot of light. So you've got what you were looking at was a spiral shell construction. And some of the towers, which were many stories high, were basically just long, tall spirals. You could see that in some way that this could have grown or formed from a natural electromagnetic grid effect, which obviously follows a natural force of nature. That was very interesting, and I seem to recall at that point in time that brought back memories of some stuff I'd seen when I was very small. Basically the same thing, because my father was a builder, and so I was well versed in how buildings were constructed. At 5 years of age, I remembered then at that stage that I was taken up through these buildings that were constructed by growing material. Here we go from there. We might, try and do some slides so I can perhaps show you what buildings look like. And we might go into some time travel stuff that's shown here, and some atomic structure material which might be of interest to some people here. To dim the lights and maybe set up the slide. Now this is sort of a hybrid Xena which I was telling you about. It's not a completely accurate representation. To just give you an idea, the eyes are very large, the brain cavity is very big, highly intelligent, very small mouth, probably a smaller nose than that, but with some distinct ripples just up between the eyes on the nose. And you'll see the relationship of that, so you can flip to the next slide, which is of an elder, or I'm sorry, okay, this is similar to this. It's a glass case that the lid was capable of coming up and down, and when you stepped in it, it actually closed, and I never saw a door, so I don't know how it closed. And what we have in the back there isn't a cushion that it might appear to be. It's actually like a grid effect, and I believe that grid spun around in a circular motion when you were inside it, and for some reason coated your body with this sort of blue bodysuit. Okay, let's get to the next. Now, it's probably not coming very well on you. The eyes are a little too dark and a little too deep in your accurate description. But I think you might see some primitive meaning there if you really look hard enough, especially around the sloping jaw. And that's as accurate a representation as I can get from memory. There's no ears at all on this guy because they don't speak, so there's no sound coming through. I don't know whether they actually have eardrums inside or not, but there's no visible ears. But then there was never any sound involved in this interaction, so it's very difficult to say whether they can physically hear or they can only mentally hear. Certainly they are dynamic. To be in the presence of one of these guys, I couldn't tell you whether they're male or female, but it didn't seem to indicate a child from the and I don't know actually how they reproduce. I believe that they grow the hybrids in synthetic sort of birth chambers, but I don't know how these guys reproduce the original kind. The eyes don't shut very well there, but they're vertically elliptical, which are cat's eyes, I would say. The eye colour is very, very dark blue, and in the hybrid it's actually almost violet purple. Very distinctive. Let's get to the next one. If you're in a room with one of these guys, believe me, they'll flatten you with their awesome sort of mental power. They just seem to be able to lift you up off the floor. They're very positive. Honestly, there's nothing negative about interacting with one of these guys. Very, very positive. They want to give you a charger. Excellent if you're shutting it down. Okay, let's get to the next. Now, here's basically a rough sort of diagram of the areas that I interacted in before we got to the planet. The lower area, 200 metres across, and it was circular. I've just compressed it to fit it in the page. And an offshoot where the bodysuit was fitted, which wasn't surrounded by the light. It's just to show you the space that it occupied. I never did get below that area, although I do believe there were access to areas below that. There might have been 10 steps down, I don't know. This is the bowling alley effect that I described to you before, where we walk down this 150 metres. You notice that they're getting progressively smaller as they go up, and they could be shaped in the shape of a pyramid or a point or a wedge or whatever. And this is the only area I could access. I actually tried to get into some of these doors there, but I couldn't physically pass through them. So that's the way they locked you out. They didn't need any physical locks. You just could not pass through the door in the areas that you shouldn't be accessing. Sleeping area up there, that's interesting too, because I was told the longer I was with them, the less sleep I was needing. And in actual fact, by the time I finished that 10 days, I didn't actually need to sleep any longer. They just meditated basically in a state of meditation for a couple of hours each day. That was it. That's all they needed. There's a small recreation room up there, and I won't get into too many details to the higher area there because that was just a whole big rec room. There was three-dimensional viewing devices up there, and actually played some interactive games, computer games if you like, and the sort of area. And then above that may have been control room, I don't know. I couldn't access that. I did ask, but I didn't bother to then. Okay. Now this is basically a rough scenario of what I would call a landing pad, because when we arrived on the planet, we appeared to step out of what was a pyramid. Now I can only assume we landed in that pyramid because I got the sensation of landing. I could see down at the ground below. And I do believe that was some form of vehicle, whether that's only like a pod or a deployment from something larger, I don't know. That we did have to transfer out of one area into another when we landed. So that could just be like a landing capsule, I'm not sure. There seemed to be some sort of electromagnetic group above the landing area. I don't know what that was for, but you could almost see the force field. You could see it twinkling. It actually made everything shimmer. These constructions here we transferred, when we landed, the suits removed that we'd used for spaceflight, and we were given some other suits that were golden colour and had all sorts of different properties, I was told. I won't go into details here now because there won't be time, but they were different for different purposes. Mainly there was a lot of radiation out there. The sun was very fierce, and I believe the UV rays were probably something chronic. I don't think 15 grade sun spot would have done the job, so we had literally anti-radiation suits on. I noticed that they had all spiral towers on the top of these pyramids, and they had some glowing form of, I can only assume that they were either energy gatherers or energy dispensers. I never quite figured out what that was. This is a scale of the door area on the pyramid. And you'll notice that one of the insignias here, they have three basic countries or three groups of nationalities. And this is an insignia of three different nationalities. The line connecting the three separate groups that have combined to form one race on this crown. Also above the door, it doesn't show up very well there, is an arrowhead type insignia which would seem to be on the entranceway of every pyramid I went into. Seems to be an integral part of whether it's just a decoration or whether it specifically means something in detail, I really don't know, but the arrowhead and the pyramids go together. Okay. These are actually made out of glass construction actually. Now, when we got onto the home planet, I actually studied with a group of these entities. I just put some mark there just to explain that to you. But they actually live in family groups. There's two elders, and as I say, I couldn't tell male from female if there was such a thing, and up to three hybrid, you could say hybrid children, but they were actually adults in this situation. So the family grouping seems to be two elders and three children, and these elders are really teachers as well for these hybrids. Very, very incredible people, I can assure you. They might look a bit scary there, I don't know if it does or not, but they're very friendly, very compassionate, very loving, and the only thing I ever got from them was good vibrations, I can assure you. Now this is, you don't really see the spiral effect on this so well. I've got a line coming through here which goes up through here and goes around through these spirals up to the top. Within the construction is sort of internal crystal gauze sort of effect that you can almost see through. Starting to think about the houses, most of them didn't seem to have any windows. But they were computer driven, if you could call that, from their own mind. If you steered a wall long enough, the house got the idea you wanted to see outside and you could see through the wall. It's useless. There's various sizes of this. Now, when I was explaining to you that, I don't really know how you can see that, this is one side is a skeletal structure of chlorophyll, and the other is a skeletal structure of blood in the environment. And as you can see, the actual the layout of both is identical, except that with the chlorophyll you've got a magnesium central core, and with the blood hemoglobin you've got an iron core. But if you swap those or put out the central core, you can see that both constructions overlap. So constructing a house from an animal and vegetable mix, I don't think would be very difficult if you're as advanced as these people were. In fact, it's even been reported that both these sequences may have a common ancestor. And that was said by someone with a funeral dance and that. I'm pretty good. This is a smaller version of another dwelling. They seem to be able to make them any size they want depending on what they wanted to use them for. But all of these smaller constructions were really only just personal houses. They had enormous buildings and there was a connection if you like. This is one structure. There's a human scale to the side here, but really, to be honest, you would be smaller than that, probably half that size. These drawings were done by my stepson, and these illustrations hopefully will be in a book that Duncan's going to put together for us on this adventure. So they're not my drawings, but I think you see how I draw you. You'd rather be looking at these, I can assure you. They're immensely tall towers, and most of the buildings, including the pyramids, have that spiral, what I could call only a sort of aerial or gathering device on the top, highly luminous, it shone in day or night. And I still don't really remember whether it was gathering energy or dispensing it. Okay? And the construction underneath was similar. I believe it went down in a wedge shape into the ground, because I went down into a couple of labs below ground, and they seem to go down very deep. So I'd say it's sort of like a mirror image under the ground. Okay, next. Just another spiral tower, but here again, I think, as you were watching Callum's lecture earlier this morning, there's nature at its best. These people use nature's power to construct their buildings, and there's a spiral structure. I can't explain it any more than they just use nature's forces to do the work for them. They don't fight it. They just convert it. Must be the way to go. Next. This is what they call a primitive means of transport. They actually used some sort of transportation system on the planet which just zapped you from one place to another. But there was something like that used, calling out that word, that didn't have stations that could be teleported to or using the teleportation. So they did have a device which would in its closest relationship would be called a car. Now, they don't have wheels, so it seems to be some sort of magnetic repulsion that they use to support it off the ground. The roads they used, I'm sure, had some sort of metallic reaction or magnetic reaction material in it. And this craft was hovered there. And I'll tell you what the motor power of the car is like a Ford Mine power, that's what they told me anyway. There's no motor in them. It just operates by sheer will, and of course there's no friction because it's just supported on pushing the wheel. Now over the small corner here, my stepson suggested that he had a brand on it because he didn't know whether it was a Ford or a Chrysler. That's actually their national insignia. In fact, if they ever visit this planet and you see a spacecraft with that insignia on, you know exactly where we've come from. It's just a triangle inside of a half-completed, three-quarter completed circle. And it's got a little story to it. That is actually their insignia for 12. Their numerical system which runs in groups of 12, which might seem vaguely familiar to some of you that are as old as I am. Imperial system of 12 pennies, etc. In its figure 12, though, the circle is split on the side. That's the only difference. From the national insignia, the circle is split at the head of the pyramid, and for the figure 12, they turn it slightly on the side, and it's a bit of a difference. The reason that 12 and the national emblem are similar is because it literally represents their progress. They are very proud of their dimensional travel capabilities, and the pyramid you went into is one of their major feats of construction. It's the same form of crystal pulsation system that they use to take themselves from one area of the universe or solar system to another. And the half or three-quarter completed cycle is actually their inability to complete their dimensional shift in a full cycle, which is what they intended to do when they had genetic experiments on their own dimensionality. They never quite made it to the dimension that they were supposed to go to, which was maybe 4 or 5 if you were going 4 dimensions by number. They're now stuck in that cycle and they can't get out, they can't progress forward at all. They've been in this system for possibly millions of years and they're not evolving. And of course now with the planet, with the sun going on, that's why they come back to us. And they're actually progressing back to third dimensional reality. For the very most important reason, I believe they know that the people of this planet are going to evolve to the fourth or fifth dimension very soon. They want to come back to third dimensional reality and take that buffalo with us when we go to fourth. So they were they intended to go many millions of years ago and stuff today? Okay, next. Now, they did describe basically what time travel was all about, and they were very succinct in describing to me that there is no physical matter in the universe that is solid. Everything is constructed of wave and vibration or resonance patterns, and the more dense the resonance and pattern, the more solid the object, or the more dense the object. And the same is true for time. Time is just a frequency wave. And evidently what they were suggesting to me was that because we are inherently tuned to the pulse of our time, or our solar system, or our universe, we can't time travel in physical capabilities unless we alter our resonancy of our life pulse. And the way they have done that is by virtually inserting themselves in a huge crystal, and we call that crystal a pyramid, and therefore altering the life frequency or their resonance, their life resonance. Once you get this resonance out of simple time, as we've shown here, you can actually slip through time. Because time resonance is the only thing that holds us in place, according to them. So once you've altered your own personal time frequency or pulse, then you can travel through time, past or future, depending on how you tune the crystal that you may be inserted in or may be using as a tool. Okay, next. Now, this is basically what I've put there is that if you had a crystal of a size, say in the shape of a pyramid, pulsed it up, as you know, the quartz crystals are used as a time mechanism or a timing in modern watches, because crystals do pulse and do resonate if they're rejected with an electrical charge. I believe that the pyramids or time travel devices they use are just really a large crystal which is pulsed up and then used to break through that resonance barrier and therefore take you where you want to go, because you've got capacity to tune that to a desired destination. And they also suggested to me that there are some time overlaps occurring in nature because of the waveform of time. If you live in present day, and the wave sequences get slightly out of whack, which could be done through other people manipulating them or natural resonances in the universe, perhaps planets getting too close together, or suns sort of erupting in supernovas and sending out waveforms through the universe. Time can get squeezed up, pushed out of phase, and you can get time overlap, so it's quite possible that even in present day time you could be standing in a place and get a vision of the past and the future, and they tried to describe to me that might be the system that is causing that to happen. So you don't necessarily need technology, you just have to be in the right place at the right time. Okay, that's the last of the slides, I think, so if we have the lights back on. I'm not sure what we're going for time. I think we're just about out now, so I was going to do some matter construction for you, but we'll skip that, I think, and just run some questions. If anybody would like to ask me. Okay, you were asking the subversive government agencies why they particularly wanted to ask me some questions. I can't exactly tell you that because I never cooperated with them. They wanted to debrief me on where I've been, and they wanted to know all about the people I've interacted with. Evidently, I believe they'd come across these people in time travel experiments of their own, and they were quite keen to find out what I do, I believe. But as I never cooperated and never went to any debriefings, and refused to cooperate with them, I had never actually faced them, if you like.
What is the problem with coming from New Zealand to here? Are you being erased now? And what's your reluctance to talk to them?
You're asking why I had trouble coming here, and my reluctance to talk to who?
You could just your shyness.
Well, I thought I'd just told you an incredible story. I don't know what else I could tell you. I'm already running out of time.
No, your reluctance to come to New Zealand, to come here,
Oh.
what was your concern?
Okay, there was no reluctance on my behalf, but the authorities didn't want to let me out of New Zealand. Duncan had to go to a little bit of work to try and get a visa. I need a visa. I skipped a very important part of the scenario because I just haven't got the time. They actually put me in jail because I would not cooperate with them. They set me up, trained me, and put me in jail, and that's slowed me down for the last couple of years, and that's why I haven't been able to communicate. That's why this has taken 7 years. Sorry I left that little bit out. Okay. Yes, I just haven't had the time.
And you've done very well. So I wouldn't be concerned at all. I would say, you know, you're performing excellent.
Thank you.
Why did you actually come back to this world? That hero?
He's asking him why I came back. Actually, I scratched my head over that one myself a couple of times, especially the last couple of years. No, I think there's a job for me to do, and I think the interaction. They did give me the opportunity. I did not have to come back, to be honest with you. I feel that I've got more to offer here than there. They don't really need me, if you know what I mean.
Can you tell us about the 9-year-old lady, please? What she do?
Well, I have, but I have put this. She asked me not to reveal her identity. She's fairly well known. She prefers the past to be the past and for people to think what happened and to leave it at that. I really can't go into that. That would be a betrayal of a promise. Sorry. Gentlemen?
Were these people just kind of crystal techno-freaks, or did they have a religious, spiritual perspective on things as well that you were aware of?
I really don't know whether I could answer that. I was only sort of, the only thing I can suggest to you is that they come from a loving place and a caring place, and they didn't force me to do anything that I didn't wish to do, and they were only too concerned with my well-being. They were actually as curious about it the way we lived as what I was about things. So I really can't, give you details. Yes, sir.
Are you still in contact with them? I mean, over that period of time, have you, is there still a connection established there, or are you able to communicate with them?
He's asking me if they're still connecting or contacting me, and I think we'll just leave that at the moment, please, because I'm having enough problems as it is.
Come back to the planet. And how do they expect to interact with people on this planet and to live amongst us with the type of technology and the way they see things, which is so different from...
The lady's asking what or how they intend to come back and when they intend to come back and what they will do when they got here. I can't obviously answer the last question because I had no idea what they would do when they got here. They did suggest to me that they would be back within my lifetime, and if you read the material that's going to be coming up in Nexus in the next few months, I think that will give you a pretty good idea of the time schedule. I wasn't given a time schedule except within my lifetime, which could be any time from now for the next 30 years perhaps. Yes, sir.
Was there any body experimentation done on you by these entities?
Nothing, sorry, he's asking if they did any physical experimentation on me. I did give her some body fluids. There was no major intrusion into my body. There was no surgery, there was none of that stuff, and everything was very, very, put it this way, compatible with my wishes. They gave me options. Yes, sir, in the check.
They look very similar to the Greys, and the Greys don't have too good a reputation on the planet. I'm just wondering how they intend to interact with this planet while they still have sort of interaction between the Greys and US military department.
He's asking me that these aliens look very similar to the Greys and what they might do when they get here. Well, have you seen a grey? Okay, well, the question is difficult to answer because neither have I. And I don't know what the greys really look like. There's as much disinformation out there as information. I would suggest that you be careful about where you get that information from.
What colour was the skin? We don't even know what colour the skin is.
Sorry, the gentleman's asking what colour their skin was. More blue than this, but a blue-grey, but definitely this is simply blue. You wouldn't miss him if you met him in the street, I can assure you. Yes, sir.
Be like another race working together, but in a negative way?
The gentleman's asking if there's another race working with the government in a negative way. Well, that would possibly, if you believe what you read, that would be the Greys. These people are about as far from that, I would imagine, as you could get. They do not interact with other alien intelligences unless they absolutely have to, as that's what they told me. They're not particularly happy with what's going on this planet. But as I do not know what other races are doing or even what they look like, I really am not qualified.
The reason I ask is because my father's a medium, and in their sanctuary, they've been told by the people working with the government what they're doing. Without knowing that, it's really bad. I just thought, you coming down here, I thought you'd be telling us more about what they're doing.
Okay, you're asking me what the alien intelligence are doing on this planet. Well, really, if I'm talking about alien intelligences outside of the ones I've had my immediate contact with, once again, I don't know any more than you do. I can read and simulate information and make my own judgment calls, but that's all I'd be giving you. It wouldn't be anything I learned from other sources, so it wouldn't be any more relevant than
I was wondering if they probably mentioned about their evolutionary path and why they stopped evolving and why they needed to come back to third-dimensional reality in order to accept the higher dimensional reality.
He's asking me if they explain to me, well, the evolutionary process basically and why they're stuck. They do, but I need another 3 hours to explain it in detail. But basically, they play God with their own genetics. They really destroyed the evolutionary path by going off on a side trip which doesn't seem to have an exit.
Like an externalization of seven dimensions rather than things coming from developing your soft body people, things using external means to come to the dimensional realities rather than some of those structures that we may have in our energy system.
Okay, just asking for more details on genetic evolutionary path, basically. They forced it physically, yes. Technically, they tried to force what you would call a God concept of evolution, not that I believe in evolution, but in a technical way, and they really have stuck themselves in a muddy patch. The thing is that in the dimension that they're in now, there are no planets that exist in nature in that dimension. So therefore, they can't actually live on a planet in what we would call dimension 3.5. If you consider that we're third dimension, maybe the next one up is 4, we're at 3.5, which gives them, the reason they play with dimensional evolution was it gives them more freedom and time. It's going to be very difficult for third dimension beings to travel in time beyond your lifespan. That's what they're explaining to me. Yes, sir.
What is your perception of your evolution of the events? It's like, is it tangible us here and now?
Okay, he's asking my previous profession, of which I've had several, and was the interaction as real as standing here? Only we'll ask the second question first. The reality of it is no more than a memory of anything you've ever done in your life. A trip away, friends that you might have used to know that passed on, you couldn't physically see now, but you only got a memory of them. I can't go back physically and touch them again because it's history now and it's only memory. So there's no way explain it any better than that. And what's your first part of the question?
What is your profession prior?
Okay, my profession prior to that, well, my very first profession was a sailmaker actually, closely associated with military, you might say. From then I progressed through various jobs. I was a car dealer for a while actually, hence my knowledge of mechanics. And I've done several jobs at the retail stores, retailing and so forth, but the last 7 years I've actually been living this mountain. I haven't had a job for 7 years, I can't work now. I'm out of the system, and that's by choice. I don't choose to go to work from 9 till 5.
How long were you ago for?
How long, he's asking me how long I was ago. I was actually sentenced to 5 months, and I just do 6, we do half of it in the non-violent. Yes, sir.
How many of now that
Well, he's asking me how many of the aliens there are. It was suggested to me that the total population of that planet was 15 million. Now that doesn't mean that 15 million are going to come here, because obviously we only have to genetically alter themselves to get here. So how many they genetically alter to come here would be how many come here, but I wasn't privileged for that information. What makes you think they were living? Yeah, she's asking if they've incarnated of this planet. They possibly have, but I think they need to physically bring themselves forward also, and you have to ask them why. He's asking if they gave an explanation of how mankind would move into the next dimension. They didn't really, except that they told me to expect it imminently. But once again, no time scale. I don't think they want me to live a life of knowing when things are going to occur, because that tends to muck things up. And I don't think I want to ruin my life completely. I have to live it like you do without having to particular pieces of knowledge. So,
It may bring your own question, why?
theory that much tonight, and I hope to get you back before midnight. But something of the complexity of all this perhaps could be understood if I told you of a meeting that I had down in Victoria about 10 days ago when I was the guest speaker of the annual convention of the Farm Management Society down in Albury. And the subject I'd been asked to speak on was the New World Order, which created a lot of controversy. There was some dissension about whether I should be there speaking. Apparently it's a hot subject. But the most interesting thing to me was that the conference concluded with the convener getting up and telling the audience his experiences. He said, I have heard Prime Minister Bob Hawke and President George Bush talking about a new world order. And I was interested in that, and I wondered if it had any bearing on economic problems facing farmers. So he said, I rang the Department of Trade down in Canberra and said, look, have you any material on the New World Order, and could you provide a speaker to our forum so that we can get a bit more information? To which there was a long, pregnant pause the other end of the telephone line. And they said, well, they did have some material on the New World Order, but they weren't quite sure if they were at liberty to release it, and they certainly didn't have any speakers. And there was a bit of shuffling around where they asked each other what the right thing to do was, and apparently nobody quite knew, so they suggested we get on to the Department of Foreign Affairs, which probably was the right department dealing with that subject. So he rang the Department of Foreign Affairs, and he said there was an even longer, more pregnant pause the other side of the line, and they said yes, they did have a lot of material on this, but they weren't quite sure how far they could go in releasing it, and beside that they didn't have speakers, and they weren't quite sure if they could help. So why not try the Prime Minister's Department? So he rang the Prime Minister's Department, and he said the pause there was the longest of the lot, and they said they had a lot of material on the New World Order program, but they didn't have any speakers, and the material they had, as far as they understood, could not be released without the personal go-ahead of the Prime Minister, who wasn't available at that particular time. So they were dreadfully sorry, but they couldn't help. And he said that was the situation. We have coming over our news services a whole lot of talk about the New World Order and Australia's involvement in it, but apparently we can't get government speakers to come and tell us what it's all about, and that is the reason that I've been invited to speak. And I've got to be honest in saying that over the 20-odd years that I've been looking at this question, that's broadly been the reaction. A lot of people have a vague feeling there's something called a New World Order, but it's not one of the things you speak about in polite company. And apparently we've reached the stage now where if you want to get on in this hard, cruel world, you're not allowed to speak about politics or religion or the New World Order. And if you keep off those three, you're going to do very well. About 10 days ago, we had an article in The Australian by an academic called John Carroll, speaking about the whole question of protection of Australian industry. Now, he struck something of a blow by saying that unless we begin to do something to protect our Australian industries, it's now only going to be a short time where we have nothing left to protect whatsoever. And he made the point that since the 1970s, we have decimated half our industries in Australia. That's in a period of 21 years. Half our industries are gone. A whole range of things that we used to produce, we don't make any longer. We buy them, and we wonder why everybody jumps up and down and complains about the foreign debt. Now, I want to tell you why we've done that and how it fits in with the New World Order and what the New World Order is. I never really came across the New World Order as a subject until I was lecturing in New Zealand in the fairly early part of the 70s. And I happened to be speaking in a little town called New Plymouth on the North Island. It's a beautiful little, really, it's a little fishing town that nestles under Mount Egmont, if you've ever been there, on the west coast. And I was speaking at that time on the growth of the debt of the third world countries and the fact that they'd already reached the stage. They were trying to borrow money to pay the interest on what they borrowed previously, and there's no possible way that anybody can survive doing those sort of things. And at the end of the meeting, a lady came to me and said, look, I've got a little book that might interest you that seems to relate to what you're talking about. And I said, look, I haven't got time to read it, but if I could borrow it, I'd certainly be appreciative. So she gave it to me, and I didn't have a chance to look at it until I got on the plane coming back to Australia, and I opened it up. And it was a little book called A Common Interest in a Common Fund, which meant nothing to me whatsoever. So I began to read it, and it was written by an Australian economist by the name of Dr. Helen O'Neill, who might have been Humpty Dumpty for all I knew. But it was a story of a program that was unfolding through the United Nations for the transfer of control of all basic commodities out of nations like Australia to a division of the United Nations called UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And what was going to happen if this program was realized would be that 18 international commodity boards would be set up through this division of the United Nations, which would take charge basically of the world's foodstuffs and fibers and minerals. Now that was pretty important to Australia. It listed the sort of things: grain and meat and fibers like wool and cotton, timber, sugar, coffee, cocoa, obviously not things we produce here, but then it went on to a whole list of minerals like iron ore and coal and copper. And by the time you came to the end of the list of commodities they were considering, you virtually touched all what we call primary industry here in Australia. And once they had established central control through the United Nations of these commodities, something called a common fund would be set up, which is where the title came from, which would be like a kitty which all nations would contribute into, and they would try and establish what is sometimes called supply management and reserve price schemes, and they would arrange deals between producers and consumers, and all participating nations, which basically meant every nation in the world, because everybody, with the exception of one or two members of the United Nations, would be compulsorily required to take part in this thing. I thought to myself, if this thing is really a goer, I would have seen about it in, say, The Land, which is the main rural paper in Queensland, or in New South Wales, or the Queensland Country Life, or the Grain Goes, or whatever it happens to be, or perhaps one of the small business papers, because they would be discussing this. I mean, every issue is coming out on marketing schemes and how we attract exports, and if this was really on the drawing board, surely all their members would have been debating this thing hotly. I've never seen a reference to it. So I thought to myself, it must be a dream that they've got coming up sometime in the future. But nevertheless, coming through this book, there was enough to suggest that a lot of preliminary discussions had already taken place to make me want to know more. And then also through the book came a thing called the New World Order. This commodity fund idea was part of the New World Order. So when I got off the plane in Sydney, instead of going home, I looked up the United Nations in the telephone book. And yes, they had a number, and I subsequently discovered they had one of the top real estate spots in Sydney, in Martin Place. So I went along there and found quite an imposing building and a big staff, mainly from the third world. Obviously they weren't helping the Australian employment situation, but nevertheless, all very efficient and sitting behind computers and looking very industrious and busy. And I said to the girl at the inquiry desk, look, I've come across this little book and it seems interesting to me, and I'd like to know how it fits into the United Nations, and also what this thing called New World Order is. Oh, she said, well, we've got stacks of material on that. That is basically the ongoing agenda of the United Nations, all the international discussions and the great conferences and the sessions and the assemblies are concerned with this unfolding World Order program. So I thought, can you give me some stuff that I can take away, that I can understand it? Well, no, we don't have it available to take away, but we do have a reading room, and you can go in there and we'll provide anything you want. So I said, well, would you bring me everything that I need to understand the full ramifications? Well, she said, that's a fair bit of stuff. And I thought to myself, it's going to take 2 or 3 hours. And she came out with a trolley about twice the size of this table here beside me, loaded up with books and pamphlets and reports that came from anywhere you can think of. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and think tanks in America like the Brookings Institution and conferences of UNCTAD and conferences of UNIDO and UNICEF and then more think tanks in Europe. And by the time you've gone through all this, I didn't spend 3 hours there, I spent 3 days. Coming back every morning and sitting down and making copious notes, and I didn't even know what I was really looking for. But gradually, as you went through all this stuff, out of it came quite a clear picture of a program that was already partially under discussion and being implemented, which was called the World Order Program. And it had a number of parts. The first part was a very big program called NEO, New International Economic Order, NIEO, that contained a number of agreements, ingredients, the first of which was that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, both of which are divisions of the United Nations, would be merged into a world central bank with all the powers that our Reserve Bank has here in Australia, capable of controlling all lending and investment and exchange rates and transfer of funds from one part of the world to the other and stock exchanges and the whole bit. Now that was a pretty big concept, a new world central bank that would take charge of all the world's lending and investment. And then it was argued that to facilitate this program, the main reserve currency that nations trade in at the moment, which is the American dollar, established at the Bretton Woods Conference towards the end of the war, would be gradually phased out and a new world money system would come in, which would replace the American dollar as the money that nations trade in. And there was a bit of a discussion about what it would be called. It would either be called special drawing rights, or one suggestion was Bank Corp, which was a name dreamed up by the man who'd actually been involved in setting up the International Monetary Fund, John Maynard Keynes, of the Keynesian economic system. And he'd also thought up this idea of world commodity control. Irrespective of what it was to be called, here was a world central bank issuing a new world money system, which would replace national currencies, and it was a totally new ballgame. And the third part was this thing I'd already seen. International control of all the world's foodstuffs, fibers and minerals, and supply management and the pricing mechanism and the whole bit. It was a huge program. Now that spun off in a number of specific programs. They had another thing called the Law of the Sea, which was international control of all seabeds and the exploitation of minerals on the seabed and fisheries and narrowing of territorial waters and a whole bunch of things like that. So it was a huge program. And I could not understand why it was that we weren't seeing more discussion about this in our rural papers and in business papers, because obviously Australia was already at least partially committed to the whole idea. So I began to lecture on it. What I could understand of it and what I pieced together and documented, I lectured to farmers and business groups and anybody who was interested in hearing it, saying, do you know that Australia is already partially involved in this? And have we looked at the implications? And I found on the whole total incredulity. People found it very difficult to believe that such a thing was even possible. And farmers on the whole used to treat me with good-humoured contempt. I mean, you know, if what you're saying is true, was the reaction, we would have seen it. I mean, we're having conferences every other day on marketing and selling our stuff overseas, and, you know, we've got our own elected leaders running the farmers' federations, and they, you know, it was really sort of, you were trying to push. You couldn't even get people to look at the thing properly. And to show you how absurd it's got, the last time I was lecturing over in Western Australia, I was invited by one of their farming organisations, the Pastoralists and Graziers, to go and have a meeting with their executive, which I did in a very plush building in the middle of Perth, obviously spent with, or built with the subscriptions of hundreds and hundreds of pastoralists and graziers. And there they had this, you know, looked very like an ivory tower to me, and we went up a few floors and we sat around the boardroom table and we had coffee, and they said to me, You know, when you used to come around about 10 years ago lecturing on this new international economic order, there was always a bit of a flurry, and people used to send us tapes in of what you'd said, and we'd sort of scratch our heads, and we'd get hold of a local member of parliament and say, you know, what's this new international economic order? And they'd write back saying, haven't a clue, probably something those nuts in the right wing are pushing round, and we sort of forgot about the whole thing. We thought it was just absurd. But now that Australia has ratified the program, this was in 1989, we're getting the first documents from the United Nations on marketing in the future, and it's pretty frightening stuff. What do you think we ought to do about it? Well, I didn't quite know at that stage. It's rather like saying, how do you catch the horse after the stable door's been left open? So all I could think of was, well, look, I think the first thing you ought to do, surely, is honor bound, is to write to all your members, who after all pay your salaries, telling them what's going on and asking what their reaction is, and so that at least they've got an up-to-date understanding of the whole program. And then to my amazement, while I sat drinking my coffee, they had an intense discussion amongst their own executive about whether they should do that or not. I don't know what the outcome was, but their paper has never carried a story on the whole thing yet. And here we are 2 years afterwards. So you'll still find that the executive understands the whole thing, but the ordinary grassroots membership is still going around saying, well, of course it couldn't be true because, you know, our representatives would have told us by now. That's how absurd it gets. Now, it wasn't very long after that I went back to New Zealand and was lecturing, strangely enough, in exactly the same town of New Plymouth. And that night, there was a trade union man present. And he worked in the meatworks in Howrah, just outside New Plymouth. And he came up at the end of my lecture. By this time I was speaking on a new international economic order, and he gave me this little book. And he said, we thought this was double Dutch, but apparently it is the program we're all to follow, and all our trade union branches have been given a copy of this, and we're supposed to be studying it. And he said, until you spoke this evening, I didn't know what to make of it. Would you like to have a look? So I grabbed it. And again, I didn't look till I was on the plane coming back to Australia, opened it up, and there was a little book, not printed in New Zealand or Australia or London or anything like that, but printed by the Novosti Press Agency Publishing House in Moscow. And the gentleman who wrote this little book was called Ernest Dubninsky, who was one of their top economists in the Kremlin, and there's a little blurb about him and his photo at the back. But apparently he's not working in Moscow. He is part of a team of 400 Soviet officials working for the United Nations, all on the permanent payroll. He was in Geneva. And this little book is the official Soviet evaluation of the New World Order program. And I thought, well, they won't like it very much. I mean, they weren't, even in the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank at that stage, they were rather hostile about the whole thing. So I opened it up and started reading, and it hit me like a sledgehammer, because right in the opening preface, he makes the point that the whole concept of a New World Order was originally put on the world's agenda by the Soviet Union. And it wasn't Mr. Gorbachev or Mr. Brezhnev or even Kosygin or Khrushchev, it was Lenin back in the 1920s who developed the concept of a New World Order. And the book spells out the whole concept. Now, if you can imagine a brilliant revolutionary putting together a most vicious revolution that seized power in the Soviet Union in 1917 and then devising a program. Now I'm not looking till the next election. You see, if you become a dictator, you don't have to worry about the next election any longer. You look ahead perhaps 50, 60, 70 years, and broadly he divided his future program into two parts. One was devoted to revolution, which was aimed basically at destabilizing the Western world, the great capitalist nations, the enemy. And that meant getting into every area you possibly could, into their colonies, doing something about breaking up their trade routes, endangering their raw materials and supplies, breaking up their markets, and then destabilizing their social structure, getting into their educational mechanisms and their universities, and even, believe it or not, into the churches. Because if you can inject new ideas right through, you can confuse people and bewilder people, and you can get the whole thing so destabilized that you can then move on to the later part of the program. And part two was Having destabilized the whole structure of the West, then we swing into place a new type of centralism, and this will be a world order program. And then it said we have to get the world to the point where all nations are directed by one central plan. That is how we're going to deliver in the final Soviet system. Now this was very, very important stuff. This was not some right-wing conservative out in the West talking. This was right from the horse's mouth. It was their own evaluation. It was just after this came out that we had the top Soviet in the United Nations, the Under-Secretary of State for Legal and Constitutional Affairs in the United Nations, by the name of Arkady Shevchenko, defected across to the Western world. And he said, you might as well face it, he said the United Nations is the biggest control mechanism and the biggest spy tower that the Soviet Union has anywhere else in the world. Nobody really wanted to listen to that. The only paper in Australia that really carried this story was the Australian. London Daily Telegraph did a lot of work on Arkady Shevchenko, who's just drifted down into complete obscurity. So this was big stuff, and I began to look deeper and deeper into the whole question. Now it just happened that before that had taken place, the Australian government started putting advertisements in the paper, asking for submissions to a Senate committee, the Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs and Defence, I think it was, on the implications for Australia of the new international economic order. So I collected all the stuff that I possibly could, put it into a submission, which was later reprinted as a booklet, and we're hoping to reprint it pretty soon again, and send it in. I never even got an acknowledgement from the government that it had gone in. They finally produced their own summary, which is that, the new international economic order implications for Australia, report from the Senate Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and Defence. That came out in 1980. And I might tell you that it, although it's very, very non-committal, it does point some of the problems that we've got at the present time. Now, even more absurd was that while that Senate committee was sitting and taking that evidence, you could still find a lot of backbench members of Parliament who'd never heard of the new international economic order. And I had quite a confrontation in South Australia with a liberal backbencher who just said, look, the whole idea of a new international economic order is a figment in the mind of Jeremy Lee. This came out in the papers. Even though the Senate committee was taking evidence on the wretched thing at the very time he was writing. And I thought, probably the only people who don't know what's going on in the world at the present time are members of Parliament, it seems to me. Now, what connection has that got with the crisis economically that we're going through? And the answer is it's got everything to do with it. Because my own personal belief is that this crisis has been deliberately engineered for the purpose of delivering in this new international economic order. Can I try and illustrate this? Now I've got to deal with just two parts, our farming industry and our manufacturing industry. Back in 1968, 67, 68, if you were on the land, you might remember we had a huge drought that wrapped the whole of these states. It was one of the severest droughts we've ever had. I remember because my father had just bought a little wool property down in New England, in New South Wales, and walked straight into that drought, and it wiped out a tremendous number of people. And there were protest meetings seeking desperately some sort of help. We had nearly 300,000 farmers in Australia at that time. And that was then followed, as we moved into the 70s, by the collapse of the wool industry. Nothing like now, but it was horrific. The price of wool had plummeted down. The ABC was running programs on the fact that wool was now outdated and everybody would be wearing silk in a few years. And by that time, there were real big protests. We were still under the control of the Liberal Country Party, as it used to be called. Bob Menzies had retired. We'd had Harold Hope, had tragically drowned, and then we had a succession of rather dismal Liberal Prime Ministers. We had John Gorton, that a lot of people remember. He was a bit like a cowboy, very exciting, but he hadn't got much substance. And then we had a funny little fellow called Billy McMahon. And by that time, everybody was very disillusioned by what was going on, and there was an exciting fellow who was now leading a revamped Labour Party called Gough Whitlam. Why not give him a go? And just before Gough Whitlam came in, we had this document produced by the Labour Party, which was Labour's Federal rural policy. And the man who put this together was a brilliant man by the name of Rex Patterson, who was a Queenslander, a Fulbright scholar, he was no slouch, and he was dealing with this horrendous crisis in the bush. And can I just read you what he said? There's ample proof to show that high interest rates are imposing severe burdens on export rural industries, just as they are on other sections of the community, such as young homeowners. A Labour government will investigate the overall application of interest rates as they affect primary production and productivity generally, with the objective of providing low and reasonable interest rates to those soundly based industries on which the economic health of the nation greatly depends. So this is what they were going to do. Labour's debt alleviation policies will take the form of making available long-term, low-interest loans to pay off immediately the crippling high-interest short-term loans which many producers have been forced to accept from financial institutions and hire purchase companies. And he had every reason to write that, because interest rates were creeping up and threatened to hit 8%. And then came the magic bit. At the same time, a Labour government will allow a holiday period of up to 5 years for potentially viable producers as regard the repayment of principal and interest in order to allow farmers to strengthen their financial position. We're going to give farmers 5 years not having to pay the bank any interest or any repayments at all. And I might tell you, that was only the rural policy. The same line of thinking was coming right through the whole of Labour's policy. Now, it immediately raises huge questions. How on earth would they finance that? Would we go and borrow more money overseas and tack it on the end of the foreign debt, or how was it going to be done? And there was no mucking about. They were quite specific. And this is what they said. Labour's long-term development policies and reconstruction policies will be financed through the Commonwealth Bank under the best possible terms and conditions which the nation can afford. And then comes a hard-hitting statement. Labour is not tied, nor has it any allegiance to the private banking sector and hire purchase institutions. Labour believes that a lowering of the rate of interest for funds used for the efficient production of commodities, particularly for the earning of export income, will assist increased productivity. This, in turn, is necessary to counter the forces of inflation associated with full employment and growth. Did you pick up that last sentence? We need to lower interest rates to counter inflation. Now then, using the other argument, we've got to raise interest rates to counter inflation. You see? We can make black look white if you're a politician. But you see, the other thing is, the best terms and conditions the nation could afford, we've got some precedents. The Commonwealth Bank financed Australia during the First World War at 0.5% interest rate. It was used to save the wool industry during the Second World War. I don't know whether you know it. We've got an absolute panic now because we've got 5 million bales of wool in stock that we can't sell and the whole thing's collapsed. We had 10 million at the end of the war, and it was no problem at all because we had the finance to handle it, and the whole lot was gone within 3 years, and then we had a wool boom. Now that's what Labour was going to do. And the man who put that together, Rex Patterson, was waiting for Gough Whitlam's electoral victory to do it. And Gough Whitlam was swept in with a huge majority, and Rex Patterson found he never even got his nose in the ministry. He was shunted off to the back bench, and into his spot came a giant of a man called Al Grasby, who became the Minister for Primary Industry, and at that moment, the whole program changed. The first steps towards internationalizing Australia had begun. The Gough Whitlam delivered Australia in that direction. He delivered speech after speech on the new international economic order and bringing in world order things. We had a lawyer by the name of Lionel Murphy who tried to bring in the first Human Rights Commission and failed because they hadn't got the numbers in the Senate. If you want to go and read what the Liberal and the Country Party were saying against Lionel Murphy when that bill was put through, how disgusting it was, and it would sabotage Australia's constitution and goodness knows what. And no sooner did the Liberals get in when Gough Whitlam got out than they put through what Lionel Murphy couldn't get through himself. There was no change whatsoever. So we were then headed straight into the New World Order program, and it was going to decimate primary industry and small business. Now, we were a pretty self-sufficient nation at that time. Hundreds and hundreds of little industries had gained maximum protection at the end of the war and were really going with their lives. You could go into the hardware shops, you could go into our grocery shops and light engineering, and you'd find nearly all the stuff you bought was made in Australia, but that's not the case today. You go into your spare parts, or you go into your supermarket and you'll find made where? South Korea or North Korea or Taiwan or Sri Lanka or Zimbabwe or Brazil or the Argentine, and hundreds of little industries, tremendous industries that used to be the basis of Australia's productive sector have gone to the wall. Half our industries lost since 1971. Half our industries. And they are now falling quicker than they've ever fallen during that last 21-year period. And the result of this is that you find more and more workers in Australia suddenly getting out of their employment onto the low queue. Why then aren't their union leaders saying, well look, why now we sacrificing Australian industry so that workers lose their jobs? We're going to fight the government, and they should have gone alongside small business to fight the program, instead of which they were all participating. So you can see how the thing has gotten. We've now reached the point where all of a sudden we're finding that the farmers have caught up with small business. We've reached the point now that in one of the great food-producing nations of the world, we're importing each year $2,000 million worth of food into Australia. And the picture is quite frightening. We're importing big quantities of meat, millions of dollars. We're importing nearly $500 million worth of vegetables into Australia. And if you want to see how absurd that is, just get in your car over a weekend and drive from here to Toowoomba through that Lockyer Valley, which is one of the greatest vegetable growing areas in Australia, and you will find farmers out there ploughing their vegetables in because they can't get them to the market. That is absolutely true. We're importing something like $33 million worth of tomato paste into Australia. How the heck you do that, I cannot think. We're importing lamb meat, we're importing leather, we're importing, you just name it, and you'll find we're now importing $16,000 worth of food into Australia for every farmer that we've got left. And that figure's going to rise dramatically because at the moment we're losing one farmer every hour of every day, 24 hours a day. Huge exodus. We're going to lose half of them before too long. And round the farmers, we're going to lose hundreds and hundreds more of what is left of our business structure. Now, how did we reach that point? Because just before Gough Whitlam got tossed out, he signed, I believe, the most infamous document of the whole lot, which is the document that sabotaged our industries. It was called the Lima Declaration. And the Lima Declaration came from a division of the United Nations called UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial and Development Organization. It was signed, strangely enough, in Lima in Peru. And basically it said this: the third world is collapsing under debt, and the reason it is collapsing is because the big industrial nations of the West have been too fat and greedy and have got too big a slice of the cake. Therefore, we're going to ask those industrial nations to sign an agreement that they will wind down their own industries and transfer technology across into third world countries so that they can begin to produce what nations like Australia used to produce themselves, and then we'll give them preferred nation status in exporting back inside those countries. Now, can you believe that an Australian government would sign a document which says we wind our own industries down and give another nation a chance to sell us back the stuff that we used to produce ourselves? But we signed that. Whitlam signed it, and the man who pushed it harder and further than anybody else was a guy called Malcolm Fraser, who was making speeches all around the world on the need for the common fund. And if you want to see it, in documented form, there is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. By this time it was under UNCTAD, an international code of conduct on transfer of technology. The whole story is in there, officially documented form. So we've wrecked our industries, and we're wrecking them even faster. And as a result of this, taxes have gone up, debt has gone up, And interest rates, well, perhaps you haven't noticed it up here, but interest rates have gone up too. And you can find farmers out in the bush paying up to 27% interest. Every time they get into trouble and move into a new risk factor, the interest rate goes up instead of down to try and keep them on their feet. The result is there's absolute chaos now in rural Australia, and we're going to see that hitting the cities with increasing violence over the next 6 to 8 to 12 months. Hundreds and hundreds of industries will go and jobs will disappear. Not because we can't produce, not because Australians are blooders and can't compete with Southeast Asia, which is the story being spun at us the whole time, but simply because we have been deliberately put under penalties which make it impossible to survive however good you are, and then accused of being inefficient when you can't keep up. And that's how the game is played. And ultimately, some point they will say, well, the only way to solve that is to try and bring in this new world order. Now, how does that then tie in with the Gulf War? When we sent our mighty armed forces over to prop up George Bush in the Middle East, it produced 2 problems for Mr. Hawke. The first was that the peace movement got its act together and we began to see peace protests, which became quite big. The second thing was, much more serious for him, it split the Labour Party. And there was a big section in the Labour Party that did not like the idea of simply wagging its tail every time the Americans whistled. And finally, at the very time he needed national unity to try and preserve some sort of impact overseas, Bob Hawke called to go to the Labour Party. The argument he used was not, we've got to beat Saddam Hussein, or we've got to defend oil, or this is a mighty blow for the little man, or anything like that. He simply said, do you not realize that this is part of the World Order program? That's why we've all got to stick together. And the Labour left basically said, oh, we didn't realize that. All right, well then we'll back off. And finally it came out in a full page in the Australian, why Labour would go to war for the New World Order. That was the headline at the top. Why Labour would go to war for the New World Order. And it had the whole argument. I'd just like to read you the arguments of just one backbench Labour man, Dr. Andrew Theophanous. This is what he said in the House of Representatives. A new world order is emerging as is shown by the unprecedented Resolution 678 of the United Nations Security Council. When a situation arises in which the United Nations has gained a tremendous boost in its power, in its authority, and is able to carry resolutions and concrete actions as a result of those resolutions, then people who describe themselves as leftist or socialist should not be concerned about it, but should welcome such developments because the increase in the powers of the United Nations is a very significant development. It is something which the ALP has been committed to for many, many years, ever since the time of Dr. Evatt. And those of you that know anything about Dr. Evatt would know that he set the whole thing in motion through the Fabian Society and was in actual fact the first president of the United Nations. So that's the argument that Bob Hawke used. Now what did Dr. Andrew Theophanous mean when he said this is part of our program? You've got to go and have a look at this document, which is the Australian Labour Party 1982 Platform and Rules, which came in just before Bob Hawke got into power. It was no longer the old traditional Labour Party of Ben Chifley and John Curtin and Arthur Calwell and some of the great Labour men of the past, or whatever else you say, were certainly patriotic Australians. This was a totally revamped, changed Labour Party that was now involved in a world program. And so it started off virtually on page 1 with the things that had to be done for the New World Order. The flag must be changed. We've got to get rid of the monarchy and have a republic, written in there. We've got to eliminate barriers against world law, such as the Senate and the Constitution. And then you swing from there and it goes straight onto it. We are now totally committed to the New World Order as part of the program of the Socialist International, with which we are affiliated. And people say the Socialist International, never heard of it. Well, you should have done, because it's just had its World Conference down in Sydney, 2 weeks ago? Now, we're not talking about a little fly-by-night organisation, we're talking about a huge movement that was started in 1864 by a gentleman called Karl Marx. He formed the first Socialist International. It fell to pieces for a short while when communism reached its heights under Lenin, but was then revamped in 1951 in a big conference in Hamburg in Germany, and now has its headquarters in London. It sends documents right throughout the world. It coordinates Labour and Socialist parties. It writes their agendas in many cases. You can go and read what the Labour Party in New Zealand says and the Labour Party here says. It comes from the same pen quite often. And they are working on a common programme towards a world order. Current chairman of the Socialist International is Willy Brandt. Former Chancellor of West Germany got sacked from office for hiding the fact that one of his top staff members was a KGB agent who'd been giving NATO secrets to Moscow, and went straight from there to the Socialist International, where he's been ever since. He was featured in the Australian, speaking on behalf of the Socialist International at their big conference in Sydney. I might just tell you, the Socialist International was scheduled to have its Australian conference in 1983, but that was the year that Bob Hawke was standing for election, so it was postponed. This came out in the media. We postponed it because it could be a bit embarrassing having the Socialist International meeting at the time when Bob Hawke's trying to get his nose in the cloth. Well, they didn't say that, trying to get into office. 1978, the Socialist International held its conference in Vancouver, in Canada. Willy Brandt was asked to push the World Government Programme. Would you set up an international commission to produce a document, the blueprint for world government, which he did, and there it is. North-South, Programme for Survival, the Brandt Commission Report, headed by Willy Brandt, 23 people on his committee, top bankers and industrialists and prime ministers, and Edward Heath, the former Prime Minister of Britain, Olaf Palme, the famous socialist from Scandinavia, they're all there. And this is, if you like, the definitive work on the world government movement. It's got the whole program. The World Bank and the Money Fund and the transfer of technology and the new money system, the whole bit. It's all in there. Pan Books got the contract to print it. I think 1 million copies came rolling off the press, and every member of Parliament throughout the world was sent a copy. Most of them probably threw it in all West Hill last week because they still don't know about it, but there is the Brandt Commission report. And that document there, there's another little book. Can't see it, and the one produced in Moscow, both came out in the same year, 1978. That's the Moscow evaluation of the World Order Programme, that's the Socialist International, both pushing exactly the same story. World government is the only chance for mankind. And that's where we are. That's the programme we're going into now. All right, now we're in 1990, 1991. How far are we along the programme? Well, every paper now is coming out with a story. This has just come out in the last few months. This came out in the Financial Review, which is the main paper telling the story. United States push the creation of new World Trade Group. That's the whole Common Fund idea. United States, grappling to adjust to the dissolution of its post-war economic supremacy, is now resurrecting the idea of an all-powerful supranational institution for world trade. Supranational means above nations, a concept it spurned and buried more than 40 years ago. The idea was originally advocated by John Maynard Keynes at the Bretton Woods conferences. The United States rejected it then because it impinged on United States sovereignty. But now is the time to accept it, you see. Or the World Negotiable Bond issue. This came out in the Financial Review as we moved into 1990. World Negotiable Bond issue. World Bank has announced plans to launch a $1.5 billion bond issue, which for the first time will be negotiable in all the world's main capital markets. The issue will be tradable in the European, United States, and Japanese capital markets. The World Bank is the largest regular user of the international capital markets, and its planned global issue will blend issuing techniques in the Eurobond and the US markets. They've had two issues since that article came out. They were both snapped up. But you see, the argument is not new. It's written as though this is a brilliant new idea they've just thought of. You can go right back to this, towards a world central bank. This was a paper given by McChaney Martin at the Pierre Jacobson letter. He was the first Secretary, I think, of the International Monetary Fund. This was, I think, 1980, and he just bluntly said, we are going to issue and create out of nothing. He actually says this, the new world money system. We will have to have control. Yes, it is true that it impinges on the sovereignty of all nations, but that's the price they've got to pay for all that. The whole thing's set out there. Pierre Paul Schweitzer, a little earlier on, 1967, issued a statement in which he said we're simply going to create out of nothing the new money that the world is going to need. Now, if they can do that through the International Monetary Fund, why can't we do it here in Australia for our own needs? And the answer is we can, and we have in the past, but we've now agreed implicitly that we won't do that because it might jeopardize the push towards world order. We've got a bunch in power who are now taking us further in that direction, and they don't want anything that will slow up the movement towards world government. Or take another issue. You've recently seen advertisements in the press, you might have experienced it, where if you go along to your local bank now, you're supposed to produce ID cards and tax file numbers, even though, whatever it is, even though you know the local bank manager perhaps, you've been in there for the last 20 years and you've played bowls with him on Saturday afternoon and babysit his kids and all the rest of it, that's not good enough. How does he know that you are you? So, you've now got to produce all this ID, but where did it come from? Came from Interpol, the international police organization based in Paris. This stuff came out from Congressman Ron Paul, one of the most brilliant and knowledgeable commentators in America, talking about Interpol. During the past 20 years, Interpol has mainly been used to track terrorists, armed theft, international murder plots and Nazis. But in 1984, things began to change. John Simpson, then Director of the United States Secret Service, was appointed as the President of Interpol. 1 year later, Raymond Kendall from Britain was appointed to oversee the daily operations of Interpol. In late 1985, top priests from 140 countries met in Washington, D.C. for 8 days for Interpol's first meeting in the United States in 25 years. President Reagan and Attorney General Edwin Meese addressed the crowd. The proceedings were not, of course, open to the public or the press. Since Interpol's activities are no longer confined to real criminals, with, quote, financial criminals and money launderers prime targets, and since the Federal Reserve defines financial crimes and money laundering as not filling out the right form at the bank when withdrawing our own honestly earned money, we should be concerned. Here are the goals of this new pact. 1. Industrial countries will adopt the strict reporting requirements of the Basel Committee, which is an international banking group. 2. The countries will then adopt the same laws and regulations concerning movements of cash around the world. 3. All banks, bankers' associations and police within the trilateral countries will share information with every other bank enforcement agency. 4. Regulators, bankers' associations and law enforcement agencies will merge their enforcement techniques. 5. Interpol Act facilities will be used as the central clearinghouse to provide information on, quote, problem individuals or businesses within this network to facilitate their prosecution. And Paul's conclusion was, this means that your local banker will become a spy for this arrangement, exchanging information on you with every other country using the International Criminal Police Organization, which could include China and possibly the Soviet Union next year. And you are, that's what's behind that one. Simple as that. Now, before the world is finally shunted or pulled or pushed or bullied or persuaded or seduced into this new world order, we're being regionalized into 3 major trading blocks. First of which is Britain, is Europe, which comes into fruition on the 31st of December, 6 days after Christmas, 1992. Everything is now 1992. Now, I don't know whether you realize it, but on that night, the Union Jack is pulled down in Britain and a new flag goes up. If you find that hard to believe, here is a special supplement produced by the Sunday Times in Britain that gives the whole story. Sunday Times magazine, you are a European, here is your official flag, this is how to draw it, 1992, are you ready? And there is a picture of the new flag that will fly over the whole of the centralized Europe. It's a navy blue flag with a gold circle. It looks rather like the United Nations flag, doesn't it? curiously like the United Nations flag. We had one of the most eminent lawyers in Britain, Lord Denning, former Master of the Rolls, got up and said it's the end of our sovereignty, it's the end of our courts, it's the end of common law, it's the end of at least 1,500 years of our Westminster system. We will simply be a cipher taking orders from the centralized parliament in Brussels, and that's what it's all about. 1992. Now, the person who signed on behalf of Britain to go into that was Margaret Thatcher, who subsequently woke up to what had happened and began to dig her heels in as she realized the full ramifications of the Single European Act. She said, we agree to cooperate but not to lose our sovereignty. We certainly won't accept a Central European Bank and what is called EMU, the European Monetary System. And no sooner did she say that, than the attack began. The whole media began to tear her to pieces, which is virtually controlled by two men in Britain, Rupert Murdoch and a gentleman who called Mr. Robert Maxwell, which is his current name. His previous name was Mr. Cox. And ultimately it led to the end of Margaret Thatcher as the Prime Minister. The man to take Britain into Europe was waiting in the wings, ready to take over, Mr. Michael Heseltine, who just missed out by a fluke. And a little unknown guy called John Major became the Prime Minister, who was a Thatcher follower and is trying to play it by ear a little bit slower. He can't just stand in the light or he'll get knocked over, but at least he's trying to drag his feet. But Margaret Thatcher, interestingly, has now become the chairman of a group called the Bruges Group, which is a new association of politicians opposed to going into Europe, which has grown slowly the whole time. And they come from every party, Labour, Social Democrat, and also Conservative. And they're getting more and more publicity. They can't knock her off the perch now because she's already done, and she's probably going to do more good there than as the Prime Minister. Rather interesting. And the opinion polls in Britain show a great hardening towards this idea. So much could happen between now and 1992. But, just after she signed the Single European Act, onto the world stage bounced a new figure by the name of Mikhail Gorbachev. He just came right out of the blue. Nobody really ever heard of him. But he said a very interesting thing. Yes, I am a convinced Marxist-Leninist. Always have been, and I still am. But I'm a different one. I'm a nice one. Why? Because he wanted to bring the Soviet into this new world setup. And you can't do that while there's an Iron Curtain and a Berlin Wall. So he had to create the atmosphere in which the change was occurring. And he was fading through the world. A man who's bringing glasnost and perestroika went to America, got a trick-or-treat welcome. They had Razor Gorbachev written up in every ladies' magazine. All the little sort of finicky things that housewives pick up, you know, where she was buying her underwear and what fur coat she was wearing and what lipstick she wore and how many grandchildren. It was all this human interest stuff, but did they get sucked in? And he ended up getting the Nobel Peace Prize. The man who's driving the tanks through Latvia and Lithuania at the present time, the Nobel Peace Prize. You see, he made one mistake. All that stuff was for the West to believe, not his own people. And they began to take it seriously. And they said, thank you very much. Yes, we'll have some dissent now. Yes, we'd like a decentralization of power. Yes, we would like our own government back. Well, they weren't supposed to do that. And now he's finding that he's got the tiger by the tail and he doesn't know how to let go. He's going to be consumed by the very thing that he thought he was shaping. The second block, North America. The North American bloc is being rushed through at the present time. Now, this has only come out in just the last few weeks. This was the headline, the leading article in the Financial Review, February the 7th. There we are. North America builds own trade bloc, the merging of Canada, the United States, and Mexico to begin with. Then to be followed by countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it is not just a common market. It is political. They've got to have common legislation. All the ingredients that are being shaped in Europe, free movement, free travel, different passports. And then there's a third block, which is the Pacific Rim block. And the architect for that is a gentleman called Robert James Lee Hawke. pushing that as hard as he can. And I want to tell you, it is a central political idea. The book, The Pacific Parliament, has already been written by Mike Moore, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand for a short while before he got poofed out. He took over from Ronnie. He has written the definitive work, the Pacific Parliament, it's called. And the idea is that you have a bloc now moving from the Soviet Union itself, that's the western part, right through China, including the two Koreas, including Taiwan, which is, of course, not supposed to be there at all, it's simply part of China. The whole of Indonesia, which we forget, is the biggest Mohammedan country in the world, bigger than anything in the Middle East. Bring in the Philippines, bring in New Guinea, bring in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. And tapped right onto the bottom of that is a little, well, it's not a little, it's a big island continent inhabited by the sleepiest, dopiest, most materialistic, self-centered people in the world today. But the only thing that ever moves them is footy or tillies or arguments about whether power is better than Forex or the Melbourne Cup. And we are going to get hit so hard. We're just getting the first blow now. We ain't seen nothing. You know, we think that things are getting tough. Boy, what those people behind the Iron Curtain have gone through. I remember many of them, you know, Ukrainians and Latvians, they come up here at meetings and they say, why can't the Australian people see what's happening? Do you know that we are training young people through our educational system that don't even know their own history? We've got 75% of young people in this country who've never even heard of the Constitution. How do they know what they can defend? They know of it. All right, everybody else's dream time, from the Eskimos to the Sioux of North America or something, but talk about their own history and their own heritage. And that's where we are at the present time. Sometime, I don't know when, I'm certainly no prophet, and I don't want to start trying to prophesy, but I would imagine between now and the end of the century, we are going to be brought to a point of no return. We haven't reached it yet. Which way does Australia go? Because you see, there's one vital question we've got to answer. If we go into this world government, even piecemeal, what happens to our Constitution? Which is the founding document that put this country together. We all voted the thing in by a referendum in this country. The decisions made in Australia are made by the Australian people, not by the United Nations or anybody else. Yes, we want to cooperate with other nations, but we don't want to lose our sovereignty, surely. We the people, it says. And then that phrase, humbly relying on the blessing of Almighty God, which wasn't even in that Constitution originally, until a huge campaign said, let's put those words in. That's where truth and freedom comes from. And then it sets out the rules. This is the Parliament. This is the upper house. That's the lower house. That's how the judges are appointed. This is how we have elections. These are when the elections will be. These are the powers the government will have, no more, no less. And you go right to the end and it says, not one word of the rules for Australia shall be changed.